heal.
Wow, that's powerful. Before we get into your life story, which I'm sure our viewership knows because they've been here several times, where we're going with this, can you explain that a little bit?
I can. I think so often we get stuck in this loop of coping. So people even say, I need better coping strategies. What are my coping skills? But coping sends us on a loop. When something happens, we do that thing. Sometimes it's helpful, like we work out or we take deep breaths or we call a friend. Sometimes not so helpful, we drink in excess or we eat. Whatever it is, the problem always comes back. And that's because underlying that issue is something that hasn't healed. So my encouragement for people is got it. We've coped. And it's not that coping is bad, but it's not the final destination. So I just want to encourage people to know that there's something more than coping.
Absolutely, absolutely. Where you from, Lashonda?
I am from Detroit, Michigan.
Detroit.
Detroit City.
Okay, I've learned to respect it. Respect it. It's a great city.
It
Did you
is.
grow up there?
I did, born and raised. I spent pretty much all my life there until I went to college.
Okay. We've talked to several guests who are from Detroit, and we've heard some really good things about it. But I want to hear your experience. What was it like for you growing up in the General Motor City?
So really growing up, it was all I knew. So I didn't have a whole lot to compare it to. I definitely am one of those people that would have said, I had a good or average childhood. I realize now that everyone can say that pretty much because we don't have a whole lot to compare it to. But it was fine. I grew up on the west side of Detroit,
Okay.
Detroit proper. Sometimes I catch people in other states who say they're from Detroit and it's some far suburb. Like that ain't Detroit. But so Detroit proper. Some of our schools were named geographically, and I grew up around the corner from Central High School. So I was pretty centrally located for the west side of Detroit. But interestingly, my parents didn't allow me to go to public school. So every school, friends, mostly I only slept in my neighborhood, and all of my socialization really took place about 15 minutes out from where I lived. That's where a lot of my friends were, where I hung out a lot of the time. So I didn't have a lot of experiences in neighborhood, which is sometimes unique to people who grew up in Detroit.
So, what was your actual socializing environment?
So I went to a small private school from kindergarten to eighth grade, and then a small private Catholic high school, ninth through 12th. So a lot of my experiences were with my friends who often lived closer to the school that I went to. So I would spend a lot of time over their home. Sometimes they would come visit mine. The way I frame it is I grew up on a nice block in a troubled neighborhood. So
Okay.
my parents didn't allow me to like leave the block pretty much.
Okay.
And it also was a neighborhood or a block that had a lot of senior citizens. So there weren't a lot of young people my age. So I
Mhm.
had one really good friend who lived across the street. And that was really it. So and I grew up as an only child because my sister's 14 years older. So if I wanted to hang out with people and I didn't have exposure to that in my neighborhood, it meant I was constantly going over to my friend's home, playing with their neighborhood kids, being socialized around that, which interestingly took me out of the immediate environment of my home, but also kind of the social economic area that slept in and lived in was different than I like played in, if that made sense, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it seems like that would also influence you to be a mover, like a mover and a shaker. There's a phrase out there, oh, this person's a mover and a shaker, meaning that you know how to go from one place to another, network, adapt, and develop. It seems like that might have helped you to do that as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I don't know that I've ever combined those two things together. And I'm always doing that, Cedric. So that's good. I'm always connecting stuff for myself, but I totally agree. It's one of those things that when I'm by the time I got older, when I realized people had everything they needed in their neighborhoods and sometimes never left it, that was a foreign concept to me. Because everything I did was outside pretty much of my neighborhood. So mover shaker, yes, but also kind of this idea of having to leave where I am to get where I need to be has been woven into who I am that I'm now examining is not always true.
Wow, explain that. What do you mean by that?
So what I'm very aware of growing up in my particular family is there was a striving, and I've come to understand that that was a striving for whiteness as an idea.
Whoa.
So
Did you
yeah,
just say striving for whiteness?
I did.
Okay.
Definitely not something I realized growing up, but now that I'm doing my own work, I realize that. So what that means is growing up, I lived in what would be considered an impoverished neighborhood. Again, I went to school, my friends, everything was outside of that neighborhood. But my father would sometimes take me on these long drives to a city area called St. Clair Shores. So you go past downtown Detroit and you kind of follow the Detroit River out, and you know when you hit it, because all of a sudden the houses start to look like mansions, and there's lush green, and there's country clubs, and there's all this stuff. And we would drive, and two things were being, I knew he was communicating two things to me. One was that I could be or do anything. Like I understood that's what he was saying to me. But I also understood that, and to arrive, it meant that it looked like that. And that was directly connected to whiteness. So he would kind of push me to strive for things that were very capitalistically successful.
Okay.
But it never came with, and people like us, people who look like us, people with our skin are a part of that. So I was kind of being subtly pushed towards achieving this thing of whiteness, which I can now see truly was woven into how I viewed life, how I viewed success, how I viewed a whole lot of things. So that's very much a part of my childhood growing up.
Okay. So I anticipate a huge turnaround in perspective as you became older and as you became a subject matter expert on what we need to do to heal as a people, because it sounds like you were doing an exercise where you were connecting, and the backdrop is Detroit, which was a progressive city. People worked at the General Motors plant, or they had some level of a career with benefits that allowed them to provide for generations of their family. But even in the midst of a middle class or potentially middle class opportunity that most people had in Detroit, your parents were associating a nice house and success with whiteness.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so how did that affect your interaction with other children who looked like you, let's say in the first grade?
It didn't, because the nuance of it is I live in, I would say I grew up in 98% Black Detroit. So I didn't have experiences with white people unless they were my teachers. Really, I went to school. I can count how many non-Black kids I went to school with from kindergarten to 8th grade. And so my friends were all African American, their families and things like that. So my interactions, I had if you would say, my experience was surrounded by a lot of Black people. We went to church with Black people. It was, again, so when you said explain, that was it. Like success was that thing way out there. Like in order to truly get it, you gotta leave where you are and you have to achieve it out there. And so what that meant, what that was beginning to translate into is, well, one is suburban living. So when you get older, when you have a home, this is what a nice home looks like. These are the areas where you strive. These are where the good schools are. And so I wasn't given a foundation of pride and self as an African American person, or really a whole lot of other areas of my life. But yeah, that was very central, though, to be fair, I did not understand that at the time. Okay. I can look back retrospectively and say, okay, that's what was happening. But yeah.
Okay. So would you say that your childhood was a happy, safe, comfortable childhood?
I think if you would have asked me that 9 years ago, I would have said absolutely. Now I say no. No, it wasn't safe. So I have a history of sexual abuse in my childhood, and early sexual abuse at the hands of similar age peers. So these are friends, kids of family friends, all around my age, but a little bit older, who framed sexual games and abuse and molestation as games. And so I, from the age of late 4, early 5, before I even started kindergarten, kind of had this perspective of play and relationship. One of those early messages that I received that, again, I didn't have the words for them, but I now understand, is that my body was payment for connection. So if I wanted friends, or if I wanted to hang out, or I wanted to be connected with someone, it came with this implicit understanding that at some point my body was ransom for that. And it didn't always have to mean sexually. Sometimes it just meant people pleasing. Sometimes it just meant being extra helpful. It meant people could call me at any times of the night with no boundaries put in place. So I just kind of learned very early that in order to be connected to other people, I needed to be giving of myself. And growing up as an only child and being a very extroverted, social person, I craved connection. And so that was one of those things that for me, I thought was just part of relationships, and I didn't have anything to compare it to. So it wasn't safe. Right. But I didn't know that it wasn't safe. I just thought this was life. Right. So, to answer that question now, it's like, nah, it wasn't.
Okay. Yeah. And I ask you that because, when we look at the social landscape that we live in today, where we have to reevaluate what it means to be an African American in America. We have to reevaluate what it means to be successful and not have to connect that to other entities besides yourself and the work that you're willing to do. I had to ask you if you felt like you were being raised in a safe environment, because it could be possible that, hey, they're teaching me some things that's not going to benefit me in the future, So, I want to understand what your mentality was in elementary school when it came to just everything that was going on. Where you talk about that.
So elementary school, so we will call that kindergarten, 5th or 6th grade. Yep. I was in the same school, but I would say that I learned very early. So I presented as a happy child, social. I also learned people, kids, humanity. We learn what our family systems and social structures value, and often try to model our lives, our behaviors, our worldviews, and beliefs around that. Mm-hmm. So my father valued success, right? Which meant good grades. So I got good grades. I didn't get it solely because he valued it. I would say, I was a fairly intelligent child, but my striving for all A's, I never went to school to learn. I went to school to get good grades. And I think that happens to most children. People send their children to school to get good grades. So there wasn't an emphasis on learning, but I did get good grades. I was very social. And my father valued performance. He would have never said those words, but he valued outspoken people. We are an extroverted culture. We just love extroverts, and my heart goes out to the introverts because they are some of the most creative and ingenious people. But society, generally speaking, loves the people who can be quick-witted and use their words. And so as I noticed that was a value, a cultural value, as well as a family value, I became that. So I've had a mic in my hand since, 3 years old when you're doing your Easter speech at church, and could memorize these things and didn't need the scripts. I didn't need people to feed me the words. I've always had personality, as it was deemed. So I kind of, that's how I present it. Now, underneath, I was pretty lonely. Wow. I craved connection. And so I began to connect that when I was extroverted and outgoing and helpful, people wanted to connect with me. So I would say even as far back as elementary school, I spent a lot of time performing, being who I needed to be to get the connection that I craved. And I did that while, getting good grades and being active.
Right. Did you have conversations with your parents about connection?
No,
And now, do you think it's important for us to have conversations with our children today about connection?
absolutely. And being diverse about what that means.
Okay.
Like, I have children, and I know that right now I can't compare how I socialize to my 10-year-old son who's living in COVID. Yeah,
Mhm.
in the midst of a pandemic. He has never known a world without advanced technology. And so when he is on his game, connecting with his friends, I have to stop myself from this idea of you need to do this. And I mean, where you gonna go? You can't send him out to the playground right now, right? So there's like all these circumstances. But when I step back and just think, like, he really is connecting though. Like, I can hear him talking with his friends. And then I think back when I was that age, I was always on the phone. I lived on the telephone. It had a string connected to it. It was
Right.
plugged into a wall, but
Right.
that's how I connected. And so I think, like, that is connection. But I do think it's important that we talk to our children about what so we say connection, but when do you feel valued? When do you feel loved? And what are
Right.
you willing to do for it? We would be surprised at the boundaries our children have or have not set based on what they've had to do in our own homes to get love, value, and acceptance. So I think it's important.
I think it's absolutely huge that you suggest connection as a topic of conversation with your children, and I hope that our viewership takes note of that. One of many things that you've said so far that I think are quotable and that we can use in the future, but I think that's absolutely huge. So, tell me, where did you go from there? What was you know, your personality was huge. It was larger than life in elementary school. So that, of course, probably led to you being really popular in middle school. Did it get you into any trouble?
What's interesting about being popular in middle school is I went to such a small school. It's
Okay.
like there was no such thing as popular because there's only this handful of us, right? However, trouble. No, not really, because Shonda was such an amazing performer that even if Shonda did bad, no one would believe Shonda did bad
Okay.
because of how I presented. Now, what I will say is also this kind of pervasive experience in my life was shame around my body.
Okay.
So there is a combination of kind of sexual abuse that leads to that, but also just I have always been a big bodied woman, lady, girl,
Okay.
female.
I
And
got it.
so I did not see images of myself portrayed. Black women, big bodied Black women who are not portraying some kind of stereotype or, seen as beautiful. And so that interplayed with how I interacted. So by the time I always had like this, it's hard to explain, but like I knew who I wanted to marry in first grade. I planned out my whole life. And I that's not attributed to girls. That's attributed to this sexual gateway being open for me before I even encountered other kids really my age. So there was always this hyper attunement to sexuality, being attractive or not being attractive. So that underlied so much of my existence throughout life. So middle school, I'm stuck with the same kids every year.
Right.
Every now and then you get a new kid, a new student, and however that plays out. And again, my exposure to other people was not super high, but what I learned in regards to the personality is if my personality was super big, maybe people would pay attention to my personality and not my body, the body I hated. And
Right.
so again, I learned to be quick-witted and funny and loud when I needed to be and just kind of really work the room started very early for me because it was a mechanism I used to kind of keep myself socially and emotionally safe.
Absolutely. Just we had a comment from Bridget Monique who we appreciate. You were talking about how your son plays video games and uses that as a way to connect with others. And she says, my daughter and friends actually have virtual movie nights, which I think is a great idea. They
Yes.
take it serious with popcorn and Coke. I was impressed. Yeah. Yeah, Bridget. Yeah, our children, they find all sorts of ways to they have virtual Zoom parties, and they act like they never skipped a beat. They're like, hey, we didn't have to go to Chuck E. Cheese. The living room with some paint and a canvas, just the same. So yeah. Connectiveness is a very important thing for us to achieve. However, we can achieve it.
I love it. Thank you, Bridget.
For sure. Now, LaShonda, I want to ask respectfully, when was this doorway of sexuality open for you? I understand that it was opened at a young age. Can you talk about that from a higher level?
Yeah. So again, before I started kindergarten, so preschool age, there were multiple instances of similar age peers, kind of framing sexual activity as game. So that started then. Some of it persisted with one of my particular abusers, but for the most part, going through school, because again, I'm in school now. I have friends now. I can talk on the phone to them. I see them regularly. I can visit their homes. And so I began to get the connection that I needed, and it wasn't framed around sexuality. That would not come back into my life as a major theme until the summer before I started high school.
Okay. But it affected the way that you connected with other people because you had additional things on your mind when you met a new kid, when you met a new person.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Right. So there was always this frame of, are they cute? Am I cute? Now, some of this is just kid nuance. I get that, but right. It's deeper level, Can I see a person and not be planning what our life looks like? Because, for a child, especially a child as young as I was, who experiences sexual abuse, part of the process of processing that is trying to make sense of what happened. Now, what I can understand from my similar aged abusers is that they were trying to make sense of things that had happened to them as well. And if you know how a child learns, you've watched a child in their development, then you notice that how they play is what they observe. And so sometimes I'm able to understand that what they were doing with me as a child wasn't a maliciously intended to hurt me, but they were acting out the things that had happened to them, with the exception of one who it probably started that way, but then he just turned into a full-fledged predator over time. But I understand these other kids were just playing they were recreating what they had seen. So I definitely think it influenced that. I also have to add, because of lack of supervision, and part of my loneliness is my mother worked full time. My father stayed home, but he was largely emotionally absent, off in his own world. So I had early exposure to pornography as well. So early age exposure to pornography, which again, I don't know what this is. This mimics the games that I've been playing, and it doesn't set me up for a realistic perception of relationship or sex or intimacy or any of that. So all of that is influencing how I'm meeting the new kid that came in 7th grade, I have this whole lens of how I look at relationship that thankfully so many of my peers have no concept of. However, I was subtle enough. By middle school, I was probably, high ranking shapeshifter people pleaser. So I never let on to it. If I hinted at something and they kind of demonstrated that they didn't know what I was talking about, I was able to steer away from it until I found people who understood the language I was speaking and maybe could connect with them in that way.
So when did you realize that you had concerns about your body, your physical body? When did that start?
Oh, good question. Oh, that's a really good when. So it's one of those things that I kind of always knew that my body was bigger than, but I would say 6th grade is probably the first time, because that was the first time I was ever teased about it.
Yeah, so school kids can be they can be pretty mean. They can be pretty mean, and some of the jokes that they come up with, if you can only remember and repeat them, it'd be like, hey, wasn't that something?
It was. And like, we read a book, I don't remember the name of the book, but there was a character in the book named Susie Q. Okay. And Susie Q, however, whatever her descriptors were, they started calling me Susie Q. And the interesting thing is, again, very small school, but there was, unfortunately, I feel so bad now, but there was like one young girl who kind of got the brunt of teasing. And I'm not minimizing it, but it's nothing like we see today with the, you know, the level of bullying or kind of how social media fuels that. But she got the brunt of it. So I kind of escaped under the radar until 6th grade when it was like Susie Q, and it was like, wait a minute.
Right. They remembered.
Wait a minute. What are we doing here? So I think that is when I noticed, okay, yes, my body is bigger. Yes, I've felt issues around it, but now people are starting to point it out. And from that point forward, when my interest in boys turned more into, oh, I'm going to talk to this boy, or we're going to go together, whatever that means. And their responses to me of rejection, or numerous instances where I like a boy and then one of my friends, because we're all pretty much friends in this small school, likes the same boy, and they always pick the friend, right? So I began to get these messages around middle school of just, you're not good enough, no one likes you, this, and this. And I always knew there was a difference between my inside and my outside. Mm-hmm. Everyone loved Shonda, like her personality, her friendship, her capacity to hold space for people. You know, like, I think I've been a therapist for real my whole life. Like, right, people come to me for that. But there was this distinct difference between how they saw me as girlfriend material or my body. And so that became very stressful, very evident, very hurtful and lonely for me during my middle school years.
Okay. Now, what I'm hearing is that your mother was at work a lot of the time. Your father did not do as much connecting as he could have. And so I see you in a unique position today to talk to us about a conversation that could have been had between you and your father that could have made you more confident and competent about not only your body, but the social environment that you were in. So can you help me as a father and any other fathers that might be out there? Or if it's the other way around, the father's always working and the mother's available. How can you help us today to frame a conversation that can help a young person who's in your situation like you were?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would do is I would deframe conversation. So we start to think like, what do I need to say? And so I always say, it's not what you do, it's how you be. And so we're talking about being aware of little moments regularly throughout time. My father never made me feel shameful of my body, ever. But his lack of attentiveness to me, who I was not enough to compensate for what I wasn't getting from peers or from boys. And so I would say it's less about what is this one conversation or 5 conversations I need to have, and what is it like to be consistently and constantly in your child's life, pointing out their attributes, not just their flaws. You know, my dad strived for success and excellence. So when I brought home a report card that was all A's and 1 B, the very first comment he said is, hey, how do we get this B up to an A? He never frowned. He wasn't upset. He wasn't mean. None of that. But it taught me a lesson. No matter how good it is, it can always be better. And what I also have to say is there was one high school diploma between both of my parents. Okay. So education was important. I had to become what they weren't, what they couldn't be, all of that. And so this perfectionism, this striving, it was never my weight to carry. It was my dad's. Now, he wasn't intending to drown me in perfectionism. He wanted to propel me forward. But just because he wanted this for me doesn't mean that he took into account who I was. So we never just sat and talked about my strengths as a person, my humor, my personality. If your child displays something, and I'm gonna tell you where a lot of their gifts lie is the thing that drives you nuts. That thing that annoys the crap out of you about your child. If you take 3 steps back and observe that, man, you will be able to find some resilience that you just probably weren't hitting on. And so can we start having conversations about just who they are, how they be? Part of the interactions is a lot of people think that children learn to love themselves based on how they are loved. And in part, that's true. We as children learn what we deserve, and whether in regards to love, affection, all of that attention from our parents. But we also as children learn to love ourselves by how we watch our caregivers love themselves. And so when we are growing up in family systems where the parents are hyper focused on whatever that is, maybe it's taking care of everyone else. This happens, it's not exclusive to moms, but it happens a lot with moms. Moms say, my kids first, my kids first, my kids first. You know, I'm doing all this for them. Everything I do is for you. I neglect myself. I don't pay attention to myself. And we think that's going to fill the well of our kids. But what they're also learning is how to treat themselves based on how mama treats herself. If mama never takes care of herself, then how dare I take care of myself? And so I want parents to be human. I think that's the biggest thing I can say. And as parents, we sometimes sit and say, how do I become superhuman? How do I do everything perfectly? How do I do it right? I say, do it, learn, and be human with your children. When you make a mistake, apologize.
Right.
When you got something wrong, come back and say, hey, this is what I was thinking. This is what I've learned. Bring them on the journey of humanity so they learn what that is. And I think those things outweigh a single conversation or even a series of conversations. I think if my dad, once I got into school, had just spent time with me, that would have impacted because I would have been worth his time. But because he was so distracted, if I wasn't even worth his time, then I had to find somebody whose time I was worth. And I was willing to give whatever I had to give to do that. And so I think that's important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, LaShonda Sugg, you are giving us a very dynamic conversation today. And I really appreciate you. For all our viewers out there, feel free to take a moment to subscribe to America's Next Motivator TV show page on Facebook. You can find us on YouTube, Roku TV, Android TV, and Apple TV. And stay tuned. We'll be right back after a brief message. America's Next Motivator. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern. Tuesday and Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern. America's Next Motivator. Hosted by me, Cedric Riley, and sponsored by the Pride Empowerment Network. Ladies and gentlemen, real quick, before we get back into this conversation with LaShonda, I just wanted to talk to you guys about some changes that will be coming here on America's Next Motivator. It's been brought to my attention that we could use another segment. People have been sending me some messages and some ideas of some things that we could do to make our show a little bit more robust. So if you have ideas of what we can do as an additional segment to America's Next Motivator, this is why I invite you to come and view the show, be a part of the audience, and be a part of the growth of this brand. I look forward to your comments, your ideas, and if you don't make any suggestions that I like, I'm going to do what I think is best. And we're back. LaShonda, I'm happy to have you back here with us. We've had a great conversation so far, and I want you to get us to high school. What were you doing in high school? What was that like? And paint that picture for us.
Yeah. So before I can take you to high school, I kind of got to pause in the summer between graduating 8th grade and starting high school.
Okay.
So this striving for connection led me to connect with a cousin. So it's one of those things that is not just for my family. It's not a Detroit thing. Really, I think it's an African American thing. You know, you got relatives who ain't blood related at all.
Okay.
Aunties and uncles and cousins. So it's this kind of situation where it's a cousin. She's not biologically related, but her mother and my mother have been really close since before I was born. Okay. And I started hanging out with this cousin. She was 14 years older than me. So hindsight, I can look back and say, I don't know. Maybe outsiders perceive that as more of a mentor-mentee kind of thing. There were no alarms raised. And so I started hanging out with this cousin. And the things I loved about hanging out with this cousin is one, she was a big body woman as well. And so she looked like me in that regard. Two, from my 14-year-old lens, she was like super awesome and special and sexy. Men loved her. Hindsight, she was very wounded and she was very hurt and she was extremely promiscuous. Scope of lens at the world. And without taking too much time, hanging out with my cousin meant that I would spend my days as a 14-year-old rising high schooler, and I would spend my weekend nights as a club hopper in the bars. I always looked older than my age. And so she would scout a bar. If they didn't ID, then I would go with her. Now, the good thing is she didn't drink. So I didn't drink. I didn't know how to be an adult. So I just did whatever she did. So we hung out. So sometime between so I started hanging out during the summer. So over the course of my freshman year, hanging out with her, at one point she organized for a 21-year-old man to come and take my virginity. And I never saw him again. So we have a word for that now. It's called trafficking. I still don't know what she got from it. And so that happened. And there were these other experiences along that line, grown men, her orchestrating. And so I still to this day, I'm writing a book. So all of these things are coming back. And I have yet to come to the moment when I realized when it stopped. And at some point, I went back into my high school world as an average high school student. So it was God. Period, point blank. But at some point, all of that was happening, it just stopped. And all of a sudden, I wasn't hanging out with her anymore. And I was now a regular high school student. And I was a regular high school student.
Can we pause for a second? Yeah. You are causing a serious inspiration in me right now to encourage all the parents out there to get into your child's business. This is the point that I was trying to get to earlier. And as opposed to circumventing it throughout this conversation, I got to hit the nail on the head. Get into your child's business. It doesn't matter how old they are until they get out of your house, get into your child's business. You can send them to a better neighborhood on the weekends. You can let them spend the night at their friend's house. You can encourage a good social play and all that. But don't forget that a child is still a child. And it's very important for you to help them to create new mental pathways. Any subject that your child is interested in, you should be, as best as you can, holding their hand and teaching them how to experience that subject. Because the way that you have conversations with them and the way that you engage subjects with them from early on, it determines the person that they become. And so as I sit here and listen to you, LaShonda, I'm thinking he should have been all over you, and much respect to your father, much respect to all the fathers out there and the mothers out there. But I just want to encourage all the parents out there, get on to your children, be on them. I'm like, how did LaShonda go out at 14 years old? How did she get to the club? How? Right. How did this happen more than one time?
And the reality is, even if you're not a parent, if you have a young person in your life, so what characterizes my story is the number of adults who were peripheral, but didn't protect me. I was a child and I needed protection.
That's
And
right.
and getting in their business, even in how they say it, be a part of their lives.
Yeah.
They want you to be there.
Yeah.
I wanted my parents to be a part of my life, right? I wanted people to be there in a way that it just seems like they weren't capable of being, or whatever the circumstances. So what I did is I went for whatever I could have. That is how I got connected with the cousin, because of my yearning for connection. In regards to teaching them, when I have conversations with people about talking to their children about sex or race or any of those things, don't think they're not learning. Who do you want their educators to be? Because
Exactly.
they're gonna learn about it regardless. If you
Exactly.
want a hand in what they're learning, being a part of that, and that has to look far more than these one-off, let me give you a piece of my mind conversations. That's not relationship. That's what children are rejecting. You coming in for your 10-minute lecture. My father attempted to instill a lot of wisdom in me, but it came in these 5 to 10 minute off the cuff conversations where I just was supposed to sit, listen, and absorb. He didn't ask me my perspective. He didn't say what's going on with you. So that is relationship. So to your point, Cedric, where children buck and where they reject and where they distance is when get in their business is, let me tell you about you. And they like, you don't even know me.
So
You,
let me clarify what I mean by getting your business. When I say getting your child's business, I mean be their partner through everything.
yeah,
From the day they're born to the day that you can't see them no more because you've left this earth. Be their partner. As soon as I wake up and my child wakes up, I immediately starts partnering with them throughout their whole entire day. My first comment is, did you brush your teeth? Did you wash your face? What did you dream about last night? What are you eating for breakfast? What are your plans for the day? What are your goals for the week? This is a day. As soon as I lay eyes on them, I immediately begin partnering with them about what's going on today, what happened yesterday, and what's going to happen tomorrow. And so when I say get into your child's business, I mean, yes, I'm going to keep up with the times and I'm going to let you have a phone. But guess what? I'm going to teach you how to get on the internet. I'm going to teach you what I think is the cool websites for you to be going to. Okay, whether it be Nickelodeon.com, whether it be crosswordpuzzle.com, or YouTube for kids. I'm going to teach you how to get on your phone or the computer. I'm going to teach you where to go. I'm going to teach you how to have a good time. And I'm going to teach you how to sign out. Right. And so that's the level of involvement that I'm trying to encourage when I say get into your child's business. If I send you to your friend's house, guess what? Me and your mother will be calling your friend's house after about 35 minutes to make sure, just to say hi, checking in, being a part of your experience. You know what I mean? We have to find every opportunity we can to partner with our children. So yeah, I don't want to go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, and what I love about that, and even with partnering, is I also invite you, let them in your life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's be a part of theirs, but let them be a part of yours.
Mm-hmm.
And when we can partner in that way, I definitely think that's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
That is, what did you dream about last night? Here's what I dreamed about last night.
Yep.
And I think so many of us have grown up in family structures that have kind of said, stay in a child's place. This is grown folks' business. And there was very little overlap between that space. And so being a part of their lives, you are absolutely right. It's very important. And when you lay that foundation, when they find themselves in social situations that are contrary to what you've taught them, it doesn't eliminate peer pressure, but they have such a solid foundation that it's like, nah, I don't think that's right.
Right.
But part of it is when they don't have that foundation, they don't know it's wrong. They begin to know it's wrong when they get in trouble for doing things because they haven't had anyone kind of telling them anything differently. So it's proactive parenting instead of reactive.
Exactly.
To your point, this is what happens when we don't heal and we have children.
Mm-hmm.
When we are so consumed by our own trauma, our own issues, our own pain, our own hurt, that it may not be intentional, but sometimes we can't even see the hurt and pain of our children. And so it's not necessarily intentional neglect, but it's neglect the same. And I think what happens too is because I put forth this face, I learned very early. No one asks a smiling person what's wrong.
Wow.
So as long as I was smiling and happy, everybody's like, "Oh, Shonda's fine."
Right.
Why I felt lonely is because no one cared enough to look beyond that smile and say, "What's going on within you?"
You know what? You know what? I found a clip of you talking on the internet, and I think this is a great opportunity.
Me?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think this is a great opportunity to share that clip. Is that all right with you?
Sure.
All right. Give me 1 second.
So when you are standing across the room and you look at the kitchen counter, if there's no debris on it, like no clutter, it looks like a clean counter. As you approach the counter, like the island or the countertops, as you approach them and you get closer, guess what? Still looks clean. As you look really close, still looks clean. But boy, when you rub your hand over the top, it can be some really nasty stuff on the countertops. How often is that our life? How often do we look at another person, or do people look at us, and just because there is no visible debris or clutter, everyone assumes that everything's okay? And what that does is oftentimes people can feel resentful or passed over or ignored because they're in so much pain that's not visible, that sometimes they're just waiting on a person to reach out and say, "How are you?" Like, are you genuinely, how are you? Are you doing okay? Let's just talk about what's going on in your life.
Yep.
Sometimes people have not developed the muscle to.
So can you talk to us about what capacity we were seeing you in just then? Because you're talking about just now you were talking about years ago, but here you are in the modern day 2020 as a subject matter expert in that capacity. Can you talk to us about what you do today?
Yeah. So that was a clip from my Therapy Thursday videos. Every week I put out a Therapy Thursday video on YouTube and on social media around some topic, usually whatever comes up in my life that I think is helpful. But I am a trauma specializing therapist and trainer and consultant.
Okay.
My own experiences of trauma, I didn't call it trauma until I was 30. I didn't know it was trauma until then, but my healing journey of trying to figure out how all of these things that have happened to me in my past were influencing how I showed up in the present led me into the role of healer. And so I do that by doing therapy sessions I love multi-generational families. Working with individuals is okay. I'm phasing out of that because I need mama, I need daddy, I need that teenager, adult child, I need grandma, I need the auntie and the uncle, because we're all impacted by this generational trauma that we're not addressing.
Talk about it.
So simple things like, because I said so. Not allowing a child the opportunity to ask why, to get more information, to build autonomy and agency, which is voice, choice, and control. That is a generational trauma cycle that has been passed down since slavery. Mm-hmm. And as we continue to parent our children in these ways, we are carrying forth this whole traumatic way of being in the world. And so I help people look at families and people look at what's my template. A template is the worldviews, the beliefs, and the behaviors that we develop growing up in our family systems and social structures.
Okay.
How I believe people deserve affection and love, how to get it, and what I do to get it. I learned pretty much all of that by the time I was 7. Everything else, this is everybody, not just me. Our templates are pretty much set by 7. Everything else we learn, we just put on top of that template.
Right.
And so when we don't intentionally examine our templates, it's like a bagless vacuum cleaner. Okay. It sucks up a whole bunch of stuff, good stuff, toys, change, earrings, key. It can suck up good stuff, but it's really hard, nasty, dirty work to dig in that canister and pull out the things that are valuable, set them aside, and throw away the rest. Right. Some of us are full to capacity with junk, junk that doesn't serve us and never served us, but we live out our trauma, but we call it personality. Well, that's just who I am. That's just what I do. When really it's how you adapted to survive that system. So that's what I do. I mean, really, no matter what I'm doing, whether I'm doing a video, I do a lot of trainings. I have a podcast, the Labors of Love podcast. All those things that I do are getting to that point, helping people explore these things because they matter. And once we start to realize the things we know that are no longer useful, we have to figure out what need are they meeting. Build muscle to meet that need, doing something different, and then we can let go of that thing we want to change. So that's what I do.
Awesome. I think that you're doing something that is very, very much needed across the world. I think that a lot of people are a product of things that they took in growing up, some of which might have not been appropriate. Some of it might have been toxic. And that's kind of made them part of who they are. And now they just say, that's my personality. Well, there's time for accountability in your personality. Like we say, nobody's perfect. There are some aspects of what we call our personality that we can work on. And somebody like LaShonda is here to help us work on parts of our personality that can be made a better thing. So I appreciate you for that. You said you have a podcast, Labors of Love, right?
I do, yeah, the Labors of Love podcast.
And where can people find that podcast?
Anywhere you stream podcasts. So we're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, Anchor, all of those. I bring on guests and ask them what's their labor of love. There's so many awesome people out here doing wonderful things. I want to help them get exposure. And then it always gets tied back to relationships or mental health or trauma. And then some of my episodes are solo where, I just dig into a topic because that's just what I do and I have the platform. People find it helpful, but I'm also an external processor. So to be honest, sometimes I just got some stuff going and I need to just get it out. But what I find is it's my authenticity and it's my transparency that help people heal. Absolutely. I am a subject matter expert. I know my trauma. I know how it's connected. I know that stuff, but I live it. I live healing. Mm-hmm. I am constantly on that journey. And I think that's what draws people to me because I'm real about it. And I can be real about me and help people be real about them because I'm no longer shape-shifting and people-pleasing. I don't need that for my value anymore. I don't need that to feel loved anymore. And once I began, when I got into recovery from shape-shifting and people-pleasing, then I was able to see myself in a way. And one of the most ironic things is people are far more drawn to me just as I am than they ever were when I was trying to be what they wanted me to be. Yeah. Or what I thought they wanted me to be. So the healing journey is work, but it definitely can be done. And I want to help people get there.
Sure. We are rounding third base here, and I've had a very, very good conversation with you today. I'm glad that we were able to connect, and I have a few questions for you. But first, I want to know: can you give our audience 3 suggestions, 3 things that they can do to start their healing process right away?
Yeah, that's good. The first is so it's a process I call NAA. When something comes up in your life, that feeling, that emotion, notice it, acknowledge it, accept it. Okay. When we begin to notice what's happening in our lives, that pulsing in our chest, or I'm sweating, or I feel angry, I feel resentful, whatever it is, if we can notice how it's happening in our body, and then we acknowledge it. Acknowledge means simply sometimes saying out loud, I feel something, or giving it a name, give it a color. I feel the black feeling in my chest. The accepting part is not, I want it to be like this forever, or I like it, but it's simply in this moment, this is what I'm experiencing.
Sure.
And so when we can notice, acknowledge, and accept, we begin to be honest with ourselves about what we need to change in order for us to have fulfilled lives. Absolutely. As long as we keep denying it, ignoring it, and pushing it away, we can't bring to the surface the things we want to heal. So I would say that's a good foundational step.
That's excellent. That's excellent. Now, these are our final three questions. We ask all our guests these, and this is yet another value point in this conversation for those who make it to the end of the discourse. My first question for you is, what is survival to you?
Survival is